I'm Dennis LeGear, and we're here to get down to the brass tacks and hard facts of over and under pumping handline nozzles. This occurs on the fire ground. It can be both accidental and intentional. Let's first talk about a smaller handline, an 1.75" handline. This fog nozzle is set to pump at 160 at 50. It's essentially a fixed orifice, just like this smoothbore nozzle. The orifice varies in pressure and volume and reaction force depending how much water goes through it. That's based on pump pressure. This nozzle generates a good fire stream in a wide variety of pressures. Let's look at 40 to 60 PSI. Well, let's say the fire departments decide to operate this nozzle at 50 PSI as it's really designed to. When would it be accidentally underpumped? One example of this would be you're fighting fire on the first floor and it's spread to the second floor. You move up one floor. That's technically 5 pounds of head pressure. So without an adjustment on the pump panel, if you had everything perfect, the nozzle would be operating at 45 PSI. That's fine. That's an operational range. You really want to focus on having a good operational range. So if your gauge isn't reading accurately on your pumper, or the handline nozzle goes down a floor or up a floor, it maintains a reaction force that makes it deployable and maneuverable on the fire ground. Let's step up to the 2.5" handline. This nozzle is an 1.25" nozzle. It's an ideal nozzle size for 2.5" handline. It will generate a good fire stream at 50 PSI, roughly around 325 GPM, but a very high reaction force. How can we address this and make this line more mobile if this is a piece of equipment on our fire apparatus? Well, we could decide to run this nozzle at 40 PSI. If we run this nozzle at 40 PSI, it's going to generate about a 300 gallon a minute stream at roughly 95 pounds nozzle reaction. But we're going to give up some forward velocity. You put a couple kinks in it, it might drop to 35 or 30 pounds. Below 35 pounds, you don't have a very good fire stream. But at 40 pounds, at 300 gallons a minute traveling through that 2.5, you're going to have water going through there at a sufficient speed to knock out kinks. Most modern 2.5 is around 2 3/4 inches. So if you put an 1.1/8" nozzle or an 1.25" nozzle on it, it's commonly overpumped. This nozzle overpumped rapidly reaches a nozzle reaction that's hard to handle. So an 1.1/8" might be your choice. You have to know your equipment. What else could we do though? How could we intentionally take advantage of something like this? Well, I have this nozzle on my rig. It's an 1.25" nozzle. Can it serve two functions? Yes, it can. This can be basically a small master stream. Let's say I pull this line to knock down a large body of exterior fire, and I've decided to run the tip at 80 PSI. I could do a barn loop and sit on it or use some webbing, and I could operate it at 80 PSI and get roughly 400 gallons a minute at 200 pounds nozzle reaction. It's not really a handline. I've mechanically created a situation where I can flow that water. Now I want to go inside the building with it. With a simple radio call back to the pump panel, I could tell them it's a handline now, and they could pump in a manner that gets me 40 pounds on the tip. One item you might want to consider is you might have an issue with your hose in your fire department. It might be a very large fire department with 30 apparatus, and you have all different hose specs. And you find yourself in this nozzle spec, 160 at 50, or maybe a 15/16. And it's behaving good on some hose and bad on other hose. Well, you can try two different approaches. You could try reducing the nozzle pressure or increasing the nozzle pressure. Often increasing the nozzle pressure helps in the last couple feet with the nozzle, whether it's hose-induced nozzle whip. It's the hose that's causing the problem. What can we do? We can increase back pressure. Nozzle pressure is also known as back pressure. If I go from 50 PSI to 60 PSI, in this little space right here, I've increased 10 pounds per square inch holding that hose open. I've increased velocity, I've increased nozzle reaction a little bit, but if that balance fixes my hose issue through my whole fire department, that's perfectly acceptable to do. The converse you want to be very careful with. If you decide that it operates better at a low pressure, like you have a 15/16 nozzle, for example, and you're trying to pump it at 40 or 45 pounds, one kink or a few kinks, it's less forgiving. You might lose your effective fire stream. It's a balancing act. It's really based on knowledge. You can overpump and underpump these nozzles and still expect performance and maybe correct some issues with your hose.